Ma'am, this is a serious violation.
The clipboard trembled in Karen's manicured hands as she marched toward the pristine backyard pool, her heels clicking against the concrete like a countdown to war. She'd called in every favor, pulled every string, and now the city inspector was finally here to shut down what she called that eyesore next door. But as the inspector's flashlight swept across the property line, illuminating something that made his face go pale, Karen's triumphant smile began to crack. The very thing she'd been fighting to destroy was about to become her own destruction. And the neighbor she'd tormented for months was about to discover a secret that would turn everything upside down. The sound of children's laughter drifted over the fence as Marcus Rivera adjusted the pH levels in his pool for the third time that week. The crystal-clear water reflected the morning sun, creating dancing patterns on the deck he'd spent his entire savings to install. 6 months of weekends, countless YouTube tutorials, and more trips to Home Depot than he cared to count, but it was worth it. His kids finally had the summer they deserved. "Dad, can we invite the neighbors over for a pool party?" His 8-year-old daughter Sophia bounced on her toes, her dark curls still damp from her morning swim. Marcus glanced toward the imposing 2-story house that loomed over their modest ranch home. Empty and untouched, a monument to wealth rather than joy. "I don't think they're the pool party type, Mia," he said softly, testing the chlorine levels. "But Mrs. Weatherby seems nice. She waves sometimes." Marcus bit back his response. Karen Weatherby's waves were about as warm as the Arctic wind that seemed to follow her everywhere. In the 3 years since they'd moved to Maple Ridge Drive, she'd made it clear that their family didn't quite fit the neighborhood's standards. The comments started small observations about his work truck parked in the driveway, suggestions about more appropriate landscaping, pointed questions about property values at the homeowners association meetings he rarely attended, had pushed her over the edge. "Marcus." The voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Karen Weatherby stood at the fence line, her perfectly styled blonde hair gleaming in the sunlight. At 52, she maintained the kind of artificial perfection that money could buy. Botoxy-smooth forehead, teeth whitened to an almost aggressive brightness, designer yoga clothes that had never seen an actual gym. "Morning, Karen," Marcus straightened, already feeling the familiar tension creep into his shoulders. "We need to talk." Her voice carried that particular tone she used when addressing what she considered the help service workers, restaurant staff, anyone she deemed beneath her social station. About this situation. She gestured toward his pool with obvious disgust, as if he'd installed a sewage treatment plant in his backyard. "What situation would that be? Don't play dumb with me. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The noise, the constant construction, the property value impact. This whole thing is a disaster waiting to happen." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "My family enjoys swimming, Kieran. Kids tend to make noise when they're having fun." Fun. Her laugh was sharp and cold. "Try telling that to the Hendersons when they can't sell their house because of the circus you've created over here. Pool parties every weekend, music blasting, children screaming, children playing," Marcus corrected firmly. "And we follow all the noise ordinances. Pools closed by 8 every night." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Oh, I'm sure you think you're following the rules, but I've done my research, Marcus. I know what I'm talking about." There, it was the implication that he was too stupid, too poor, too other to understand the complexities of suburban living. Marcus had heard it all before, wrapped in the kind of polite language that made it impossible to call out directly. Research, building permits, safety regulations, environmental impact assessments. She ticked off each item on her manicured fingers. You can't just dig a hole in your backyard and call it a pool. There are procedures, protocols, inspections, all of which I followed. Marcus's voice remained steady, but his hands clenched at his sides. "I have every permit, every approval, every inspection certificate. Want to see them. Those can be overlooked, especially when certain people get..." The racism was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus had dealt with it his entire life, the assumption that any success he achieved must be unearned. He'd worked 2 jobs to save for this pool, every penny earned through 16-hour days of landscaping work that left his hands raw and his back screaming. "What exactly are you saying, Karen?" "I'm saying that pool is a safety hazard and a neighborhood nuisance, and I'm saying that someone with proper connections might be able to get it looked at more thoroughly. The threat hung in the air between them like smoke. Marcus glanced back at his house, where his wife Elena was making breakfast, and their kids were getting ready for another day of swimming and laughter. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd sacrificed for. Now under attack because they dared to build something beautiful in a neighborhood that didn't want them. You do what you need to do, Karen, but this pool isn't going anywhere. Her smile was razor sharp. We'll see about that. Marcus noticed her husband Richard standing at their kitchen window, watching the exchange with obvious discomfort. Richard had always been polite, enough quiet, but he never intervened, never stood up to the woman who seemed to view their entire neighborhood as her personal fiefdom. Who was that dad? Sophia appeared at his side, her swimsuit dripping onto the deck. Just a neighbor, baby, nothing to worry about. But even as he said it, Marcus felt the familiar weight of dread settling in his stomach. She had money, connections, and the kind of ruthless determination that came from never being told no. If she wanted his pool gone, she'd find a way to make it happen. 3 days later, she did. The inspector arrived at 7:30 a.m., his county vehicle parked deliberately in front of Marcus's house rather than in the driveway, a thin man in his 50s with thinning hair and the tired expression of someone who'd seen too many neighborhood disputes. He introduced himself as Dale Morrison and produced a clipboard thick with official-looking documents. Got a complaint about unpermitted construction? He said without preamble. Need to take a look at your pool installation? Marcus had been expecting this. He'd already pulled all his permits, organized every inspection certificate, and prepared a detailed timeline of the construction process. Everything's in order. Want to see the paperwork? I'll need to see the actual installation first. Sometimes things look different on paper than they do in reality. They walked through the backyard, Morrison making notes on his clipboard, while Marcus pointed out the safety features. The inspector's expression remained neutral. Professional, but Marcus caught him glancing toward the Weatherby house, where Karen stood watching from her kitchen window. Drainage system looks good, Morrison muttered, kneeling by the pool's edge. Electrical's up to code. Safety barriers meet requirements. Marcus felt a surge of relief. So we're good? Well, there's one thing. Morrison stood, dusting off his knees. I'll need to check the drainage flow. Make sure you're not creating any issues for surrounding homes, of course. Whatever you need. They walked the property line, Morrison examining the grading and drainage patterns. Marcus watched nervously. As the inspector made his way toward the back corner of the yard, where a small drainage ditch ran between his property and the Weatherbys, the ditch had been there when they bought the house, a natural channel that carried rainwater to the storm drain system. Morrison stopped suddenly, his flashlight beam fixed on something Marcus couldn't see. Mr. Rivera, I'm going to need you to step back. What is it just? Step back, please. Morrison was now kneeling by the drainage ditch, his flashlight revealing something that made him curse under his breath. He pulled out his phone, taking several photos before standing and wiping his hands on his shirt. Mr. Rivera, installation is completely up to code. Excellent work, actually. But I'm going to need to speak with your neighbor about a much more serious problem. Marcus felt his world tilt. Serious problem? Morrison's expression was grim as he looked toward the Weatherby house. That drainage ditch, it's been illegally diverted. Someone's been channeling gray water from their house directly into the storm system. That's a major environmental violation, and it's been going on for years. The inspector's words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Karen Weatherby, the woman who'd spent months trying to destroy his family's designer sandals, clicked against the concrete, his integrity, as she approached the two men standing by the drainage ditch. Breaking the law on her confident mask was already slipping, replaced by the careful calculation of someone who'd spent a lifetime talking her way out of consequences. Gentlemen, I hope everything is going smoothly with the inspection. Her voice carried its usual authority, but Marcus caught the slight tremor underneath. I trust you're finding all the violations I documented. In my complaint, Inspector Morrison looked up from his notes, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Weatherby, isn't it? I'm going to need to speak with you about this drainage system. Of course. I've been documenting the runoff issues for months. The way that pool affects the natural water flow is completely unacceptable. I have photographs, measurements, even water quality tests showing, ma'am. Morrison's voice cut through her prepared speech. For a moment, she looked genuinely confused. as if he'd asked her about quantum physics instead of her own backyard plumbing. "I'm sorry. What? This drainage ditch has been illegally modified. Someone's been channeling household wastewater directly into the storm system. Based on the pipe configuration and the flow patterns, it's coming from your property." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. Marcus watched, transfixed, as the woman who'd spent months terrorizing his family struggled to process what was happening. That's impossible. Our house is connected to the city's sewer system, has been for 20 years. I'm sure it is for most of your wastewater. But someone installed a secondary drainage system that bypasses the main sewer connection. Kitchen sink, maybe laundry room, possibly a bathroom. It's been going on for years. Years. Karen's voice cracked. But I never, we never. Morrison knelt again, pulling aside some overgrown grass to reveal a 6-inch PVC pipe that emerged from the direction of the Weatherby house. The pipe was old, weathered, and clearly hadn't been installed recently. "This is a serious environmental violation, Mrs. Weatherby. We're talking about potential contamination of the groundwater, illegal dumping, possible health hazards. The county takes this very seriously." Marcus felt like he was watching a movie, The Villain's Perfect Plan, crumbling in real time. Karen Weatherby, the woman who'd questioned his permits, his integrity, his right to exist peacefully in this neighborhood, was staring at evidence of her own lawbreaking. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Richard handles all the the house. Maintenance. He would have told me if there was a problem. Where is Mr. Weatherby? Now, he's at work. Downtown office. But he'll be home for lunch. He always comes home for lunch." Morrison made a note on his clipboard. "I'll need to speak with him. In the meantime, I'm going to have to call this in to the Environmental Compliance Office. They'll want to test the water quality, trace the contamination source, determine how long this has been going on." Karen's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. "Wait, you can't just... There has to be some mistake. We're filing a complaint about his pool, not... I never said anything about drainage problems on our property, Mrs. Weatherby. When you file a complaint about drainage issues, we investigate the entire area. That includes all properties that might be affected." Morrison's voice was patient, but firm. "Your neighbor's pool installation is completely legal and up to code. But this illegal discharge system could result in significant fines and mandatory remediation." "How significant?" The question came out as a croak. "Depends on the extent of the contamination and how long it's been going on. But we're talking about potential fines in the tens of thousands, plus the cost of environmental cleanup and proper connection to the sewer system." Marcus watched Karen's face cycle through emotions, shock, disbelief, fear, and finally, a desperate kind of anger. She turned toward him, her eyes blazing with the fury of someone whose world was collapsing. "This is your fault," she hissed. "If you hadn't built that ridiculous pool, none of this would have happened." "Ma'am, your neighbor's pool has nothing to do with your property's drainage violations," Morrison said firmly. "These are completely separate issues." "Separate issues." Karen's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "He's the one who caused the drainage problems in the first place. All that construction, all that disruption, it must have damaged our system somehow." Marcus felt a flash of anger. Even now, even with the evidence literally at her feet, she was trying to blame him for her problems. "Karen, that pipe is older than my pool by decades. You can see the weathering, the sediment buildup. Don't you dare tell me what I can see." She whirled on him, her finger jabbing in his direction. "You have no idea what you've done to this neighborhood, what you've cost us, property values, peace and quiet, the whole character of this community, Mrs. Weatherby." Morrison's voice carried the authority of someone who dealt with plenty of difficult people. "I'm going to need you to calm down. Getting angry isn't going to change the facts." "Facts?" Karen laughed, but it sounded more like a bark. "The fact is that these people moved into our neighborhood and started causing problems from day one. The fact is that their pool is a nuisance and a safety hazard. The fact is that I've been documenting violations for months. The only violations I've found are on your property," Morrison interrupted, "and they're serious enough that I'm required to report them immediately." He was already pulling out his phone, dialing what Marcus assumed was the Environmental Compliance Office. Karen watched him with growing horror, as if she was seeing her entire life reshape itself in real time. "Please," she said, her voice suddenly small. "There has to be some way to handle this quietly, some kind of ... arrangement." Morrison paused in his dialing. "Are you suggesting I ignore environmental violations in exchange for some kind of benefit?" No, I didn't mean. I just meant that surely reasonable people can work these things out without involving bureaucracy and red tape and, Mrs. Weatherby, I'm a county inspector. Following the law isn't bureaucracy, it's my job." He finished dialing and walked a few steps away, speaking in low tones to whoever answered. Karen stood frozen, watching her perfect life crumble around her designer shoes. Marcus felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. He'd been angry at this woman for months, frustrated by her constant interference and barely concealed prejudice. But watching her world fall apart, seeing her realize that her own actions had created the very disaster she'd been trying to pin on him, it was hard not to feel some pity. "Maybe," he said quietly, "maybe we should call Richard. He might know more about when that pipe was installed." She looked at him as if he'd suggested calling in an airstrike. Richard doesn't. He's not good with confrontation. This would just upset him unnecessarily." "Mrs. Weatherby, your husband is going to need to be involved regardless," Morrison said, returning from his phone call. "The environmental compliance team will be here within the hour. They'll want to speak with the property owner about the illegal discharge." "Property owner?" Karen's voice was barely a whisper. "The house is in both your names, I assume?" She nodded numbly. "Then you're both legally responsible for any environmental violations. The fines, the cleanup costs, the mandatory remediation, that's on both of you." Marcus watched Karen's face as the full weight of the situation settled on her. This wasn't just about embarrassment or neighborhood drama anymore. This was about serious legal consequences, financial ruin, and the destruction of the carefully curated life she'd built in Maple Ridge. "I need to call my lawyer," she said suddenly. You're right. But I should mention that the Environmental Compliance Office has authority to issue immediate cease and desist orders for ongoing violations. If they determine that contaminated water is still flowing from your property, they can shut off your water service until the problem is corrected." "Shut off our water," Karen's voice cracked. "They can't do that. We have rights. You have the right to an attorney and the right to contest any fines through the proper legal channels. But you don't have the right to continue polluting the environment while you figure out your legal strategy." The sound of a car door slamming interrupted them. Richard Weatherby stood in his driveway, still wearing his business suit, looking confused and worried as he took in the scene, his wife's stricken face, the inspector's official clipboard, Marcus standing awkwardly to one side. "Karen, what's going on? I got your voicemail, but I couldn't understand." She ran to him, her composed facade finally cracking completely. "Richard, they're saying we've been polluting the groundwater. They're talking about fines and shutting off our water and environmental cleanup, and I don't understand any of it." Richard's face went pale as he listened to Morrison explain the situation. But unlike his wife, he didn't seem surprised by the news about the illegal drainage system. He seemed terrified. "Mr. Weatherby," Morrison said carefully, "do you know anything about this secondary drainage system?" Richard's eyes darted between his wife and the inspector, and Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. Richard knew he'd known all along. I think I need to speak with my wife privately," Richard said quietly. "Of course, but I should mention." The environmental compliance team arrived like a small army, 3 vehicles, 6 officials, and enough testing equipment to stock a laboratory. Marcus watched from his deck as they transformed the Weatherby's pristine backyard into a crime scene, complete with yellow tape and hazmat suits. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead environmental specialist, was a known-sense woman in her 40s who treated contamination like a personal insult. She'd been testing water samples for 20 minutes when she looked up with an expression that made everyone step back. "This is worse than we thought," she announced, stripping off her latex gloves. "We're not just dealing with gray water discharge. There are chemical signatures here that suggest industrial contamination." Karen, who had been pacing her patio like a caged animal, stopped dead. "Industrial contamination? That's impossible. We don't have any industrial anything. This is a residential neighborhood. Mrs. Weatherby, I need to ask you some specific questions about your household activities. Do you or your husband work with chemicals at home? Photography? Developing? Art supplies? Automotive maintenance? No, nothing like that. Richard works in accounting. I volunteer at the country club. We don't do anything that would... Dr. Chen consulted her tablet. The water samples show elevated levels of methylene chloride and several other compounds that don't typically come from household sources. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Those names sounded serious, dangerous. He glanced toward his own house, where Alina was getting the kids ready for school, blissfully unaware that their neighbor might have been poisoning the groundwater for decades. What kind of health risks are we talking about? Marcus asked. Depends on the concentration and duration of exposure. But these chemicals are linked to liver damage, neurological problems, and certain types of cancer. If they've been leaching into the groundwater for as long as that pipe suggests, double quotes, she didn't need to finish. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Richard Weatherby chose that moment to emerge from the house, still wearing his rumpled business suit but looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. His face was ashen, his hands shaking as he approached the group. Dr. Chen. His voice was barely above a whisper. I need to speak with you privately, Mr. Weatherby. Anything you tell me will be part of the official record. Are you sure you don't want to consult with an attorney first? I can't live with this anymore. Richard's voice cracked. Karen doesn't know. She never knew. I thought I could handle it, thought it would never come out. But Karen stared at her husband as if he'd sprouted a second head. Richard, what are you talking about? Handle what? The chemicals, the disposal. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I could figure out a better solution. But then years went by, and double quotes, what chemicals? Karen's voice rose to a shriek. What disposal, Richard? What have you done? Marcus watched the scene unfold with growing horror. This wasn't just about an illegal drainage pipe anymore. This was about deliberate contamination, about a man who'd been poisoning his own neighborhood for years. 22 years ago, I started a side business, Richard said, his words tumbling. Out in a desperate rush, document destruction. Small-scale stuff for law firms and medical offices. They needed secure disposal of sensitive paperwork. And I had the basement space, the equipment. You had a business in our house. Karen's voice was incredulous. For 22 years, you had a business in our house and never told me. You were so focused on appearances, on what the neighbors would think. I knew you'd never approve of trucks coming and going, of the basement being used for commercial purposes. But the money was good, Karen, really good. It paid for your car, your clothes, half the house renovations, Dr. Chen was taking notes rapidly. Mr. Weatherby, what kind of chemicals were you using for document destruction? Industrial shredding was just the first step. For complete destruction, for things that absolutely couldn't be reconstructed, I used chemical dissolution. Methylene chloride, trichloroethylene, sulfuric acid compounds, and you disposed of these chemicals. How? Richard's shoulders sagged. At first, I followed all the regulations, proper disposal, certified facilities, everything by the book. But the costs were eating into the profits, and there were so many regulations, so much paperwork. Karen's voice was deadly quiet. Tell me you didn't. I installed a secondary drainage system, just for the chemical runoff. I thought it was diluted enough, thought it would be safe by the time it reached the storm drains. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Dr. Chen looked like she wanted to strangle him. Mr. Weatherby, you've been dumping industrial chemicals into the groundwater for over 2 decades. The environmental damage alone could be irreversible. But I stopped. Richard's voice was desperate. 3 years ago, when the regulations got too strict, when I realized how dangerous it was, I shut down the business. I haven't disposed of any chemicals since then. The contamination doesn't just disappear, Mr. Weatherby. These chemicals can persist in groundwater for decades, and based on our preliminary tests, they're still present in significant concentrations. Marcus felt sick. His children had been playing in their backyard, drinking water that might have been contaminated, breathing air that might have been poisoned, and all while Karen Weatherby had been complaining about his pool affecting property values. I need to call my wife, Marcus said suddenly. I need to tell her to keep the kids inside. That's a good precaution, Dr. Chen agreed. We'll need to test the water at all surrounding properties. This contamination could extend well beyond the immediate area. Karen was staring at her husband with an expression of pure horror. 22 years of lying to me. 22 years of poisoning our neighbors. I was protecting you, Richard said weakly. I was protecting our lifestyle, our reputation. Our reputation. Karen's laugh was hysterical. Our reputation. Richard, you've been running an illegal chemical disposal business out of our basement. You've been poisoning children. You never meant, what? To get caught, to face consequences. To have your wife find out that her entire life was built on environmental crime. Marcus was already dialing Elena's number, his hands shaking. She answered on the second ring. Marcus, what's wrong? Sound Elena, I need you to keep the kids inside. Don't let them drink the tap water. Don't let them go in the backyard. There's been a contamination issue. Contamination? What kind of contamination? Chemical contamination. From the neighbors? It's serious. I'll explain everything when I get home, but right now, just keep everyone inside. Oh my God, Marcus, are we safe? Are the kids safe? I don't know, he said honestly, but we're going to find out. As he hung up, Marcus saw that Dr. Chen had separated Richard from Karen and was questioning him about the specifics of his illegal operation. The other environmental specialists were taking soil samples, water samples, and photographs of everything. Mr. Rivera, one of the technicians, approached him. We're going to need to test your property as well. The contamination could have spread through the groundwater. Of course, whatever you need. We'll also need to test your pool water. If there's been groundwater contamination, it could have affected your pool's water source. Marcus felt his heart sink. The pool he'd worked so hard to build, that had brought his family so much joy, might now be a source of poison rather than pleasure. How long before we know if it's safe? Initial results should be available within 48 hours, but full contamination assessment could take weeks. Weeks, Marcus thought about his children, about Elena's pregnancy that they'd been planning. To announce to the kids this weekend about the future they'd been building in this neighborhood that might now be uninhabitable. Dr. Chen, he called out, what happens to the Weatherbees? What kind of penalties are we talking about? Dr. Chen looked up from her notes. For environmental violations of this magnitude, we're talking about federal charges, not just county. Fines. The EPA will be involved, possibly the FBI, criminal charges for illegal disposal of hazardous materials, environmental terrorism, endangering public health, environmental terrorism. Karen's voice was faint. Knowingly, groundwater with industrial chemicals over a period of decades. Yes, that could definitely qualify as environmental terrorism. Richard had gone completely pale. I didn't think of it as terrorism. I was just trying to make a living, trying to provide for my family. Mr. Weatherby, your living may have given dozens of people cancer. Your providing may have contaminated an entire neighborhood's water supply. The health department is going to have to notify everyone within a half-mile radius. Karen sank into one of her patio chairs, her perfect posture finally crumbling. Everyone's going to know, the whole neighborhood, the country club, everyone we know, they're all going to know what you've done. Karen, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. You never wanted to get caught, she said bitterly. There's a difference. Marcus watched the couple's marriage disintegrate in real time. 22 years of lies, of hidden contamination, of slow-motion environmental disaster, all coming out in one devastating morning. Mr. Rivera, Dr. C. The media vans started arriving at noon, their satellite dishes transforming Maple Ridge Drive into a circus of flashing lights and shouting reporters. Marcus stood at his living room window watching his quiet suburban street become ground zero for what the news anchors were already calling one of the worst cases of residential environmental contamination in state history. Daddy, why are there so many people outside? Sophia pressed her face against the glass, her breath fogging the window as she watched a reporter practice her stand-up in front of the Weatherby house. There's been a problem with the water, Mia. The people outside are trying to help fix it. Is that why we can't go swimming? Marcus's heart clenched. The pool that had started this whole nightmare now sat empty, drained on the advice of the hazmat team until they could determine whether the groundwater contamination had affected the water supply. All that work, all that joy, reduced to a concrete hole in the ground. We'll be swimming again soon, he said, hoping it was true. Alina appeared in the doorway, her phone pressed to her ear. Yes, I understand. No, we haven't experienced any symptoms that we're aware of. Yes, we'll be there for the blood tests tomorrow morning. She hung up and rubbed her temples. That was the health department. They're setting up a temporary clinic at the elementary school. Every family within a half-mile radius needs to be tested for chemical exposure. How many families is that? 47 houses, nearly 200 people. Elena's voice was hollow. Marcus, what if we're all sick? What if the baby... ... She placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. They'd been planning to announce the pregnancy this weekend, but now every milestone seemed shadowed by uncertainty. The baby will be fine, Marcus said firmly. We'll all be fine. The doctors will figure out what we need to do. A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Through the peephole, Marcus saw a young woman in a business suit, her press badge clearly visible. Mr. Rivera, I'm Jessica Walsh from Channel 7 News. I was hoping to speak with you about the contamination discovery. Marcus opened the door, but didn't invite her in. I don't have anything to say right now, sir. You're being hailed as a hero. Your pool installation led to the discovery of contamination that could have gone undetected for years. How does it feel to know that your actions may have saved lives? Hero, the word felt hollow. Marcus thought about his children potentially breathing poisoned air, about Elena's pregnancy anxiety, about the 47 families who now had to wonder if their headaches and coughs were symptoms of slow poisoning. I'm not a hero, he said, quietly. I'm just a dad who wanted to build a pool for his kids. But your neighbor's attempts to shut down your pool led to this discovery. Do you feel vindicated? Marcus glanced toward the Weatherby house, where Karen sat on her front steps, looking like a ghost of her former self. Richard had been taken away in handcuffs 3 hours ago, and she'd been sitting there ever since, staring at nothing. I don't feel vindicated, Marcus said. I feel sick. Sick that this happened. Sick that it took so long to discover. Sick that my neighbors might have been poisoned because someone cared more about money than people's lives. Can you comment on your relationship with the Weatherbys? Were you aware of any suspicious activity? No comment. Marcus started to close the door, then stopped. Actually, I do have something to say. Richard Weatherby committed a crime that could have killed people, but his wife didn't know. She's a victim in this too. So when you're reporting this story, remember that there are real people involved, real families whose lives have been destroyed. He closed the door, leaving Jessica Walsh to find her story elsewhere. That was kind of you, Alina said, to defend Karen after everything she put us through. She's still our neighbor, and she's about to lose everything. As if summoned by his words, Karen Weatherby appeared at their back door, her face streaked with tears and her perfectly styled hair hanging in limp strands around her face. Marcus, Alina, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to talk to. Alina opened the door, her nurse's instincts overriding months of neighborhood tension. Karen, come in. You look terrible. I feel terrible. Karen's voice was barely a whisper. I feel like my entire life has been a lie. 22 years of marriage, and I never knew. I never suspected. What kind of wife does that make me? It makes you human, Alina said gently, guiding Karen to the kitchen table. Husbands hide things from their wives all the time. Usually, it's not ... this extreme, but the principle is the same. Extreme, Karen laughed bitterly. My husband has been poisoning children for over 2 decades. The FBI is treating our house as a crime scene. The EPA is talking about Superfund site designation. Extreme doesn't begin to cover it. Marcus poured her a glass of water, then remembered the contamination warnings and switched to bottled water. Karen, what did Richard tell you? I mean, after they arrested him, he said he never meant to hurt anyone. He said the money was just too good to pass up, and the disposal costs were cutting into his profits. And he thought the chemicals would be diluted enough by the time they reached the storm drains. No one would ever know. But he knew it was illegal. Oh, he knew. He admitted that much. He said he kept telling himself he'd stop, that he'd find a legal way to dispose of the chemicals. But years kept passing and the money kept coming in, and ... double quotes, Karen's voice broke. Do you know how much money he made from that business? Over $4 million. $4 million from slowly poisoning our neighborhood, Alina gasped. $4 million. The FBI found bank records, tax returns, client lists. Dozens of law firms, medical practices, even some government agencies. All of them paying Richard to destroy sensitive documents, and none of them knowing that he was dumping the chemicals in our backyard. Marcus thought about his own financial struggles, the 2 jobs he'd worked to save for the pool, the careful budgeting that had gone into every aspect of their lives. And all the while, his neighbor had been making millions from environmental crime. Karen, what happens now? I mean, to you personally. I don't know. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. The house is going to be seized as part of the criminal investigation. The EPA says the contamination is so extensive that the property might need to be condemned. My car, my bank accounts, everything we own is considered proceeds from criminal activity. Can you stay with family? What family? My parents are dead. My sister lives in California, and she's not exactly rushing to help the wife of an environmental terrorist. Richard's family disowned him years ago over some business dispute. I'm completely alone. For the first time in months, Marcus felt genuine sympathy for Karen Weatherby. She'd been difficult, prejudiced, and vindictive, but she hadn't deserved this complete destruction of her life. There's a hotel on Route 9, he said quietly. The extended stay. It's clean, reasonably priced. If you need help with a deposit, ... Karen stared at him as if he'd offered her a kidney. Why would you help me? After everything I've done to your family, because you're our neighbor, because you're going through hell, because sometimes people need help, and it doesn't matter what happened before. I tried to destroy your pool. I questioned your permits, your integrity, your right to live in this neighborhood. I was horrible to you. Yeah, you were. But that doesn't mean you deserve to be homeless. Karen broke down completely, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I was so angry about the pool because it reminded me that I wasn't in control anymore. The neighborhood was changing. New families were moving in, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop anything. And all the while, Richard was poisoning everyone, and I was too blind to see it. Karen Alina said gently, you couldn't have known. Richard was careful to hide it from you. But I should have known. I should have asked more questions about the basement renovation, about the extra income, about the trucks that came at night. I should have been a better wife, a better neighbor, a better person. You can still be a better person, Marcus said, starting now. Karen looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. How? How do I come back from this? How do I face the people whose children might be sick because of my husband's crimes? One day at a time, one apology at a time, one small act of decency at a time. The sound of car doors slamming interrupted them. Through the window, Marcus saw Dr. Chen and her team returning with what looked like more serious equipment. They're expanding the testing, Karen said dully. Dr. Chen told me they found contamination traces in the soil samples from 6 different properties. The groundwater plume might extend all the way to the elementary school. The elementary school? Elena's voice was sharp with alarm. They're testing the water fountains, the playground soil, everything. If there's contamination there, ... Karen didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Marcus thought about Sophia's school, about the hundreds of children who drank from those fountains every day, who played on that playground, who might have been exposed to industrial chemicals because one man cared more about profit than people. Karen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay? Did Richard ever mention specific clients, government agencies that used his services? Karen's face went pale. Why do you ask? Because if he was destroying Sensi,